Hello, everybody. Welcome to a brand new edition of Daily to Dynasty. I am your host, Craig Gorbanoff, joined by Rich Wilhelm, and this week, a very special guest, our good friend and another former co-host of the Code Green radio show, Marcus Taylor. How's everybody doing?
Good. Doing well, Craig. Doing well.
Marcus, let's check in with you first. How's your life been in quarantine and the COVID-19 era? Hopefully everything is happy and safe with you.
Yeah, it's been great. I don't mind working from home. I don't have to get dressed up. I'll just wear basketball shorts all day. I've just been cooking and binge watching Netflix shows. It's been great.
Yeah, man, I am living the dream, never wearing pants. You cannot confirm nor deny who's wearing pants on this show. And that is maybe my favorite thing about quarantine. Rich, how's everything with you this week?
Everything's good. Yesterday we had the Mets, opening game. Let's go Mets go. Today, the WNBA starts. Might even watch a little bit of that. Who knows? Sports is sports. I'm ready. It's kind of like sports are coming back. I'm all good this week.
Exactly. I am super excited. The NBA returns next week with its regular season action. There's some scrimmage play going on. The NHL comes back next week. There's a lot of sports. It's a fun time to be a sports fan. Everything's about to be back. We're going to have a real fun show tonight. We're going to talk about all things NFL, fantasy football, Dynasty. We are going to start up our fantasy state of the divisions, kicking things off with the AFC East. If you guys have any opinions about anything that we talk about on this show, you can head on over to anchor.fm/daily2dynasty and leave us a voicemail that we will play on the following show and answer your questions live. Also, you can fire away at us on Twitter. You can find the show at Daily to Dynasty. You can find myself at Cgorbs94. You can find Rich at Coda522, or you can find Marcus at EMTaylor29. Marcus, I never asked you, what's the E for?
When I tried to make it just regular M, it was taken, so I just used the E and the M so you could pronounce it as M.
Word. I like it.
There's so many weird variations in your usernames.
I know. It's always a story behind it, though.
Your email is Makis.
It's a story.
Right.
That was a typo one day, and I just decided to keep rolling with it because everybody started calling me that. So I used it.
Yeah, Makis. Let's go.
Marcus is a man of convictions. He decides something, he sticks to it, and he's going to roll with it for life. M. Taylor, 29. E.M. Taylor.
There's a reason for everything.
Exactly. We have one more special shout-out here to open up our show, and that is going to be our friends over at the Underdog newsletter. You can, of course, subscribe at jokermag.com/newsletter, or you can find them on Twitter at JokerMagHQ. If you are a fan of Underdog stories, and if you are a sports fan, odds are you are a fan of Underdog stories. You're definitely going to want to check them out. Every single week they go and they curate hundreds of articles, videos, and podcast interviews, and then every Tuesday morning they send out a bite-sized rundown of only the best stories that you can find all in one place. Again, that URL, jokermag.com/newsletter, and you can follow them on Twitter at JokerMagHQ. All right, guys, let's get into some NFL news here, kicking things off with the official cancellation of the NFL preseason. Typically, I would say the average football fan is not a fan of the preseason, but Marcus, let's kick things off for you. What were just your kind of overall impressions of the preseason being canceled?
I had a feeling it was going to happen with the spike in COVID in different states. I'm not really that surprised that it was canceled. One of the issues I think that's going to present itself as a negative issue is a lot of these new signings, the teams won't have time to build chemistry in in-game action. Think Cam Newton with the Patriots, getting his timing right with the receivers, or some of these rookies that's expected to come in and, take over starting positions. I think that's going to put a negative impact on a lot of those rookies and new acquisitions. Think DeAndre Hopkins, with the Arizona Cardinals. Think Tom Brady with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so forth and so on. So that was one of my first impressions when I heard it was being canceled.
Yeah, and obviously I'm the type of football fan that likes to watch all the preseason games. I like to see who's going to make the rosters, right? I like seeing that third string quarterback, right, fight for their slot. And from that perspective, I was a little disappointed. But I'm not surprised in any way, shape, or form. I think that it is absolutely the right move. I think that with the spikes of COVID-19, it's important to kind of take the time to get your preparations right. And like we talked about a little bit earlier, all these sports leagues are starting to come back now. They've been making the proper preparations kind of leading up to it and having a healthy environment, and we'll get into that just a little bit later. Rich, from a fantasy perspective, what are some of the implications you think behind the NFL canceling the preseason?
I mean, it's going to be very difficult to draft this year. I mean, I think when all is said and done, I think all the teams are going to have up to 16 players on their practice squad. And they can activate any of those players, all 16 if they want, up to 90 minutes before kickoff. So although it's going to be hard for UDFAs to make a name for themselves, they are going to have more space on the team for the team to carry them. They're only taking 80 to camp, which is not the norm. I mean, obviously every year there's 90 players that come to camp, but with the spread of COVID, I mean, they're cutting 10 from every team, could help from the spread. I do believe that it's a good call that the NFL canceled the preseason. The preseason, for people like us, it's great because it gives us something to talk about. It gives us, a chance to look at the UDFAs, but really you're only watching that third game to see the starters play as like a dress rehearsal for the season. I think that coaches are going to make the majority of the decisions like they always do, and they do say that final preseason game maybe makes up for maybe 3 roster spots. Now that you have the expanded practice squad, I don't think those 3 roster spots are really something you need to worry about because all 3 of those guys can make the team. So as far as fantasy football goes, you want to draft players that maybe are on their first year, rookie players that got drafted. They can play a big role in case anything happens to the people in front of them. A big example would be Justin Jefferson from the Vikings. He's going to come in, he's young, he's healthy, he's taken over the Stefon Diggs role, plus, he's ready to go. So, I mean, it's kind of like you're drafting for Dynasty in redraft this year, too. You want to have players that are young and healthy, and it's going to be interesting. You're going to have to do a lot more homework this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the lack of the preseason is going to make drafting incredibly difficult. And my big takeaway here is that offense is usually it takes a little bit longer to come together, right? That's something we see often in the preseason is the offenses take a little bit longer to gel and to really like work out the kinks. So I wonder from a fantasy perspective if that puts a better value on making sure you get a really good defense, because these first 2 to 4 weeks of the season might be really heavy defensively and we might not see offenses get going. Do you guys have any thoughts on kind of that angle?
I mean, I think in preseason, obviously the game plan is always very vanilla. So you're not going to really see what the teams are doing. They don't want to put all their cards on the table. I think it's going to be more of a mentality that you have to win your job in the camp. You have to win your job in front of your coach, your offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. I think it's going to be more of a competition between the teams because you don't have that chance to, face 4 other teams. I think it's going to be great. I mean, it's gonna separate the teams that have good coaching staffs from the teams that don't, and it's going to separate those UDFAs that need to show 3 people as opposed to the entire country. Like Victor Cruz, there might not be a Victor Cruz this year, which is unfortunate, but it's going to be interesting.
And Marcus, any thoughts on that angle?
Yeah, I agree with Rich. No Victor Cruz, no breakout, no hard knocks. I definitely think that the coaches are going to have to buckle down, get their planning together, strategize. The cream's going to rise to the top. Players are going to perform, the ones that are able to, and you're going to separate the strong from the weak. I think we're just going to see great planning and The best coaches with the best defensive schemes, they're going to come out on top.
For sure, and I think coaching is really going to be the difference maker this off season. All right, guys, let's move on to a new topic. And in the era of COVID-19, I don't think we can have a show in which we don't discuss how the NFL is handling the safety of their players, and it's been in the news all week. Rookies are set to report to training camp with health restrictions in place, and 59 players have tested positive in the NFL over this period of time. Now, the NBA, right, is getting set to return. They've had all the players in the Disney World bubble, right, down in Orlando, Florida. Since they've kind of entered lockdown and have done testing every single day, 0 players have COVID-19. There has been 0 positive tests. So, I mean, it's a great sign for the NBA. They're going to be able to play safely and kind of quell things. Now, the NBA did have, right, an infection problem when this all sort of broke out in March, right? Rudy Gobert, and then it was
Donovan Michel.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically every team had been exposed to the virus over the course of 2 or 3 days. So this stuff can spread really, really fast, but they've kind of taken the right precautions. So taking what we know how the NBA was able to handle things, what percentage do you think that the NFL is going to enter their season with 0 players testing positive for COVID-19? Marcus, we'll start with you. Just throw out a number.
10%.
10%. Rich, how about you?
I'm going the opposite. I'm going to say 90. I think based on how they're coming into camp right now and they're canceling preseason, they're going to give everyone a chance to, quarantine. And, I think if people are showing signs, they're going to test them daily. They're going to test them daily anyway. So I think it has to be closer to 90, or we might be talking about canceling games. So I hope it's not 10, because there goes the season. But yeah, my guess is 90.
I quite frankly, I feel it's 50-50. When you look at the differences between basketball and football, the big thing that jumps out is roster size, right? And not just in players, but in the coaches, in the staff, right? In everything it takes to put together a football team. And I just think when you throw in more and more people, it's more and more variables, it's more and more X factors, it's more and more housing, it's more and more accommodations that the NFL has to consider and take into account. I think they can do it. If anyone can figure it out, right, it's the big bag NFL. But it's certainly going to be interesting to watch over the next, couple of weeks here. In relation to that, Governor Murphy in New Jersey has decreed no fans will be allowed at MetLife Stadium for Jets and Giants games. There is a numbers restriction in Atlanta of 10 to 20K fans. All fans are going to be required to wear a face mask all year long, which in the winter might not be too bad. Like in Buffalo, people wear scarves as ninjas anyway, so might not be that bad in the winter. But what are your guys' kind of thoughts about how the lack of fans, at least in New Jersey, but potentially elsewhere around the country, we'll have to see how the stuff unfolds, will impact the course of the games?
I mean, I'll state the obvious. If you go to a Jets game, obviously the Jets fans that are there, they're dedicated. We haven't won anything since 1969, but every single Jets game I've been to, it feels like an away game. So I'm saying it's probably going to be a positive for the Jets to maybe not have fans. Maybe it's going to drive the fans back into the stadiums next year because, we went to the Vikings game last year, Marcus. And
I was about to bring it up.
The entire stadium was purple. Skull. It all really depends on the opponent. I mean, I think it's the smart thing to do. Obviously, New Jersey, New York, we were hit the hardest. But also the Atlanta thing doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. If you're allowing 10,000 to 20,000 fans in a stadium that's closed, that seems like it's a recipe for disaster. I mean, you're canceling, fans being in an open MetLife stadium. I think it just should be across the board. Some fans are get rowdy. Some fans are not going to follow this, just like in life. You can't expect everyone to have their mask on at all times, especially when you're drinking and watching a sporting event. It just doesn't make sense. So I know you're going to lose some money, but I'd rather have a 16-game season plus playoffs instead of canceling games because people are exposed to COVID.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it makes sense to have fans in attendance. I don't understand the number restriction in an indoor stadium. I think the Atlanta roof might be able to open up, though, potentially. So maybe that's what they're going to do. I don't know. I could be completely wrong about that, but off my memory, I'm pretty sure that roof can open up. But I think it's going to have a big impact on the game. I think, teams are going to have an easier time on third down when they're the away team. I think they're going to have better luck with the hurry-up offense in 2-minute drills. I think it could have a pretty profound impact on the game, and offenses might have an easier time, right, scoring in kind of high-pressure situations where normally the fans and the crowd noise can make a pretty big impact. Marcus, what are your thoughts about this?
I think it's good. Again, with the spike in the numbers, they're just being careful. Like Rich said, I'd rather have a 16-game season with playoffs. I think they're trying their best to ensure that. I think it takes away home field advantage for any teams. You have teams like Seattle, they have the 12th man, that type of stuff. Like Craig said, third down, there's no rowdy crowd, yelling at the top of their lungs, trying to disturb the team. So I think home field advantage is taken away for the Jets and Giants. Also, well, like you said, you won't have a stadium full of Vikings fans drowning out the Jets fans. So, that won't happen anymore. But also, one of the negative effects is they can lose revenue. The Jets can lose over $200 million without, stadium revenue with the parking and tickets and everything like that. So it could be a positive with the home field advantage being taken away for some teams. Excuse me. But also the negative could be a loss in revenue for the Jets and the Giants.
Yeah, I think the financial implications are certainly something to consider, but obviously NFL owners' pockets are pretty deep, and I don't care too much if they're not making that much money this year. They have other entities as well, and I think that's a perfect segue to talking about our next topic here, our NFL News of the Week. And Rich, I want you to read this verbatim, what you put in our doc here. So, as most listeners know who listen to a podcast, there's a shared Google Doc. We make a little rundown, right, so we know our order of topics and what to talk about. And what Rich wrote this week is just hysterical. So I want you to read this verbatim.
I wrote that Woody Johnson is a racist, sexist, wrinkly old man, because that seems like what it was reported this week. I'll go right into it. I mean, there was a CNN report about stuff that Woody Johnson said back in 2018. A lot of off-color things, and I'm sure more stuff is going to come out. Since the, everything came out, obviously he denied because, any smart owner would. But I mean, on Twitter today, on social media across the board, you saw everyone was uniting against Woody Johnson. Because let's face it, Woody Johnson has not really done anything as an owner for the Jets since he's been here. It was kind of a breath of fresh air when his brother stepped in. Obviously it hasn't worked yet, but I mean, Christopher Johnson seems like night and day to Woody Johnson, and the Jets still haven't won a ton of games. It just seems like a different feel. You knew that Jamal Adams was going to be the first person to come out and say, it's Woody Johnson has to go. That's exactly what happened. He said, if it's right, if it's right, if it's wrong, if it's wrong, if the wrong people are at the top, obviously it's going to trickle down all throughout the organization. If these things are true, I think it's all but certain that he should just hand it off to his brother. His brother has been the owner of the Jets the entire time. He was often in jolly old England, for Trump with being the ambassador and playing cricket with the Queen. So what's the difference? Instead of causing an uproar with the players and the fans, it might just be right to just say, let Chris handle this from this point on. He's got his hand in too many cookie jars right now. He's not focused on the team. He hasn't even been in the country. So, obviously we don't get into a lot of politics on this show, but for me, this is time to move on from Woody Johnson.
And it just be starting to become a pattern, right? Last week, the big news broke in Washington about their kind of culture of sexism and bigotry, and now this is the second domino of sexism and bigotry and racism, and it's just kind of like who's next. It was like during the domestic violence cases in the NFL a few years ago. It seemed like every week we were learning about some new case, right? And it just sort of feels like it's what's about to happen in the NFL. And honestly, it's fine. These people should be outed and should face repercussions. Marcus, do you have any thoughts on dear old jolly good Woody Johnson?
Not many. I mean, Rich pretty much summed it all up. If these allegations are true, like Rich said, he needs to be out of there. Let his brother run the team. If he's been in England this whole time, not really running the team, just take him out altogether.
Yeah.
Not much to really change. If these are true, these allegations, he has to go. There's no room for that in the NFL.
So to me, this seems like someone who started dating someone else, and then that person broke up with them, and they're trying to go back to their ex. Let's say Trump loses the election. Woody Johnson's no longer the ambassador to anything. I'd rather break it off completely, give him back his stuff, instead of him coming back in November and being like, it wasn't you, it was me. So, I mean, his focus is completely off. And I was questioning if I was going to mention this in the show, but I think I have to. So today on our lovely Interstate of Green Twitter, I put a status, and I said, of course Woody Johnson and stuff like this is coming out against Woody Johnson because technically he's named after two dicks. And then, ironically enough, Dante Stallworth messaged me on Twitter, and he said, "Sorry your squad has such a sucky owner. Always loved playing the Jets in New York. Fans were some of my favorites to play against." That was unprovoked. So, I mean, obviously everyone is kind of on the same page with Woody Johnson. And, as Jets fans, me and Craig, we know all too well of the torture we've been through under his reign. So, I'm all for a change. Let's go.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you, and through some very speedy work, because I think people might think you're lying. I'm going to put that DM right up here.
I'm not lying.
Right here. I mean, Interstate of Green, that's us. You might also follow Daily to Dynasty, but whichever account, they're both us. And there it is, unprompted, and very funny tweet by Rich Wilhelm, master of Twitter.
And he loves the Eagles, so all the Eagles fans out there, obviously you guys have a great owner, so enjoy it.
Absolutely. And from a fantasy perspective, we talked a little bit about this last week with Washington, and does this have an impact? We kind of came to the consensus, right, that there's been a culture of, right, a negative culture in Washington. Now that it's kind of out, it might be the catalyst, right, for improvement in Washington. Can the same be said in New York? Do you think that maybe this culture has been contributing to the poor play and the distractions and all that, and this might be a positive step forward? Or do you think that this is the media circus that the team doesn't need to improve themselves?
See, the only big difference here is this is directly the owner. If you're looking at the Washington, situation, you couldn't pinpoint Dan Snyder as being the perpetrator. Obviously, he knew what was going on. This is directly at the owner. So if the Jets don't do something, there's going to be players coming in here thinking they're going to be playing for a racist, sexist, old, wrinkly man. So something has to change. It's a no-brainer for him, for his brothers to step in. But, the Jets do stupid things since I was born. And, if you're going to piss off the team, it's going to be bad, especially with free agents coming in. Obviously, money talks, but the cap is going to be shot next year anyway. So you might have to just build with what you have if you don't make a change.
Marcus, same question to you. Do you think that this has any impact from a fantasy and performance side?
Yeah, Woody Johnson gets removed. They could bring a whole new culture, not have that hanging over their heads in New York. Players can be inspired to, win games to help you guys forget about the allegations and all the controversy around Woody Johnson. So I think players might just play a little bit harder if he's out of there, and there's a little bit more positivity around the team. So you can see players put up a little bit better in numbers this season.
For sure. We have two more pieces of NFL news here. Antonio Brown officially retires. Good riddance. And I don't know if there's much more to say out of that. The man went crazy. And Marcus, your Minnesota Vikings extend head coach Mike Zimmer. We'll throw it to you. What are your thoughts, impressions? Do you think this is the right move? The Vikings have been good since he's been the head coach, but have not been able to get over that hump. So, how are you feeling?
I feel good. Last season, he was in the last year of his contract. Depending on how the season went, I thought they would either extend him or not. I'm glad he got the extension. He's the third winningest coach in Vikings history, and he's been the Saints' worst nightmare for 2 playoff runs of theirs. We always seem to beat them in the end. Even though he hasn't got to the Super Bowl, the Eagles put a whooping on them. The Niners, put a whooping on them last season. He's turned the team around. They've been known for their defense throughout his tenure there. He's taken them to the playoffs 3 times, 2 NFC North crowns, 59-41 in 1 tie in his 6 seasons. His defense has never been lower than 11th in points per game and top 10 in the past 5 years. He's been doing well with the Vikings. Really, the only thing that's missing is the Super Bowl. Like I said, we knocked on the door, but the Eagles, they closed that door. And the 49ers became a powerhouse last year, so they ran all over us. But, every year, you got to worry about Minnesota's defense. Every year they can challenge for the NFC North crown. Every year they're competitive. They got a chance to make the playoffs. So I think it's a good contract extension for Zimmer.
Yeah, I agree. I think you should reward positive play. They've been a great team. They've made it to the playoffs. They've gone deep in the playoffs, and they've been beaten out the last couple of years by teams that have been in the Super Bowl. So one of the best 2 teams, in the NFL. So nothing but positive things for Mike Zimmer. Let's move on now to kind of the meat and potatoes of our show here, and this is a brand new topic that we're going to be doing every week. It's the fantasy state of the division. We'll be taking a look at division as a whole, so AFC East, NFC East, right, and all the divisions in between, and giving you some fantasy players to watch out for on every single team in the division. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that we are endorsing going out and drafting them, right? But if there's a player on the team that you should be considering, these are the guys that you should be considering. But I think our draft boards would look mighty different than what we're actually going to be spatting out on this program. However, this is going to be a very weird NFL season. There's going to be players opting out. You're going to have a very deep kind of knowledge pool, right, of who's going to have an impactful season. So the more players that you can have on your short list, the better. The longer the list, the better, I think, at least for this coming year. So we'll kick things off down in COVID Central Miami, Florida, and the good old Dolphins. And Rich, we'll start with you. Who are the players on your watch list for 2020?
So, the obvious one is Devante Parker. Once Adam Gase got out of there, he was the guy again. He showed that he is one of the top receivers in the division. And I think he's going to replicate that. And, it makes perfect sense to tie him with Tua. But I'm talking Tua more so in Dynasty. Tua is probably going to go in the first round in your Dynasty league, but he's someone that could be a starter for 10 years if you want to keep him on your Dynasty, roster. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick starts the season. I think he has the connection with Devante Parker. I can see Devante Parker going over 1,000 yards this year. if there is a full season. And then Tua, him being in your back pocket is definitely not a bad thing to have, especially with, the second best rookie in this class.
Yeah, I agree. I think Tua's an interesting prospect from a dynasty perspective. He is going to get overdrafted in dynasty leagues, right? So, but don't expect him to have that kind of performance this year. Unless, I don't know, say if Fitzpatrick could get injured, he could get COVID. I don't know. Who knows what might happen? But I think it's a quality pick. And Devante Parker has been a kind of on the cusp wide receiver for me the last couple of seasons, and I think he's poised for a big year. Marcus, we'll throw it over to you. You had one similar player and one different player than Rich on your list for the Dolphins.
Yeah, the similar player was Devante Parker. He's coming off a good season. He's their number one option. The number two option is Preston Williams, but he's coming off an ACL injury. Parker was a big portion of the offense last year, and I think that's just going to continue this year. Fitzmagic may start the year as starting quarterback. And I could see Tua sliding in there towards the end of the season, but I think Parker will still be a big chunk of the offense no matter who's behind center. Secondly, I had Matt Breida. He's a new acquisition from the 49ers. He also picked up Jordan Howard, but I think Matt Breida will be the bigger option in the passing game. He's very explosive. Once he gets in the open field, it's a foot race, and I don't think anybody's really going to have a chance to catch him. I think he's going to get a good portion of the carries, be a big part of the passing game out the backfield, and I think you can get him late, so I think he can give you good value depending on how late you take him.
Yeah, I have to agree with both of you guys, and when I put up my list here in a second, you'll see I have two of the same players as you guys have. Tua, I think is great for dynasty leagues. Matt Breida, I think is going to be the back in Miami. Something happened to Jordan Howard the last couple of years. He broke out and has broken down, and he doesn't have my trust anymore. I think Breida had a great season last year. He's very interesting. He's great in the open field. Great at catching the football. I'm a big fan. I think he could do some good things down in Miami. I'm also going to throw Mike Gesicki out here. The tight end position is always very interesting in fantasy, and if you're not going to get the best guy, you have to have a couple of these B-listers kind of locked and loaded and ready to go. And I think Gesicki's a guy, he's progressed over the course of his career. He has a good knack for getting in the end zone. Fitzpatrick does like to throw to a tight end, but if Tua gets in there, a big tight end is a security blanket for a rookie QB. So I think he's someone to consider, and you might get some good value for a little bit later on in the draft. So that is some players to watch out for the Miami Dolphins. Rich, we'll kick it back to you, and we'll go from South Beach to North Frost, the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, it's cold there. So I actually heard someone say today it's basically Canada with wings. So that's pretty funny. Buffalo Bills. There's two big ones for me in Buffalo. That's Devin Singletary, and that's John Brown. So Singletary, he showed that he could be the cow at running back for Buffalo. There's no real backup there. Frank Gore is gone. I guess you could say that Josh Allen's kind of the backup running back because he takes off all the time. But Devin Singletary is someone you can get a little later. He's going to put up a lot of value. And then John Brown, he's just a PPR machine. He catches everything thrown his way. He's got a little bit of an injury concern this year, but I don't think that the acquisition of Stefon Diggs is going to hurt him at all. I think it's going to actually help him. It's going to pull some of those double coverages off. He can go into that, second wide receiver spot and, be productive. He definitely is a security blanket for Josh Allen. He is the slant machine, PPR machine, and you can get him late, and he's falling drastically in mock drafts. So scoop him up.
Yeah, and I've liked John Brown for a really long time, back to his Arizona days. I mean, he's a real quality wide receiver, has a knack for getting in the end zone. I think Buffalo's a pretty intriguing team offensively this season, just in general. A lot of young talent kind of meshing together. And Marcus, we mentioned you're a Bills fan before, and when we take at your list here, the former Viking, Stefon Diggs is right there.
That's right. I think he's going to have a good year. That's just me still loving him from his Viking days. But he has more opportunities at the as the number one option this year with Buffalo. He was a really good deep threat, one of the best deep threats in the NFL last year in Minnesota. I expect that to continue in Buffalo. Josh Allen has a big arm. I expect him to be able to get the ball to Stefon Diggs down the field. I expect Stefon Diggs to have a good season. He's not really going that early, so where he's drafted can decide whether or not it gives you really good production or just, decent production. But he's first choice. My second one is Josh Allen, the quarterback. Josh Allen, all the accuracy complaints and everything, but the man runs for touchdowns. He scored touchdowns with his legs. He had 109 rush attempts and 9 touchdowns last year with 20 passing touchdowns. I expect the passing touchdowns to increase because he has Stefon Diggs. He also has John Brown. He finished as QB 6 last year in fantasy, number 6 quarterback. I can definitely see him going up one notch with the addition of Stefon Diggs and finishing top 5 this year in fantasy. I don't think that's too much. I don't think that's too much of a leap to say he's going from 6 to 5, adding Stefon Diggs and having Brown back, and Singletary, getting more carries with Frank Gore gone. Although he has accuracy issues, he can still finish top 5. So Stefon Diggs and Josh Allen on my tip.
And as much as I hope that Josh Allen isn't super successful this season as a Jets fan, I can't say I disagree with you. He rushes the football very effectively as well. Gets a lot of points that way. And with a big cannon and a potential deep threat in Diggs, right, I think all of a sudden he has a lot more pieces in place to be really, really competitive. I took a little bit of a different route than you, Marcus. But I did put John Brown from Rich's list before, and I for Cole Beasley as my number 2 option. Mm-hmm. I think he's always been a good PPR wide receiver, but when we talked about Stefon Diggs, he's on the record saying he's not super comfortable playing with COVID-19. I think he might be a player to opt out. That's still sort of to be determined. But if that's the case, Beasley's going to be in an elevated role. And I still think that even if Diggs does play, Beasley in the slot is going to do some really dangerous things. With 2 dangerous wide receivers on the outside, you're going to have Beasley doing a lot of stuff underneath. And if you're in a PPR league, I think he is going to rack up a ton of points. So maybe a little bit too much handicapping on my side, trying to find a little sleeper for you guys. But I think Beasley's someone you could get very, very late and get some good value, which is ultimately why you listen to stuff like this, right? You don't need me to tell you, right, that DeAndre Hopkins is a good wide receiver. You should know that. You need me to throw you a little nugget like that. Speaking of little nuggets, almost every player on the New York Jets is a little nugget. So, one of my rules in fantasy football is to not draft a New York Jet. It just never works out. It doesn't matter who we've had, who's good that year. I mean, this has been my rule for like a decade, is to try and not draft a New York Jet. And the times I have has not worked out. I was big on Le'Veon Bell last year, and he was okay, but he wasn't top 5 player like I was hoping he would be.
He wasn't Pittsburgh Steeler Le'Veon Bell.
No. So it was just sad. It was just I had a very sad fantasy performance. But that's okay. We'll figure it out for this year. We'll right the ship. Sometimes it happens. So, Rich, let's start with you, Mr. Jets fan. Who are your players to watch out for on the New York Jets?
Well, now that you talk that much stuff about Le'Veon Bell, I feel bad saying Le'Veon Bell. But Le'Veon Bell for sure. I think that he has, another year under his belt and knowing the system. Plus, the Jets completely rebuilt that line, from top to bottom. You have Becton in there. You have George Fant. You have McGovern. You have Van Rotten. I mean, the entire line is different. The line last year was absolute garbage. So there's nowhere but up from Le'Veon. I won my league last year with Le'Veon, but he was my flex. So I can't even credit him for that. Anyone can go in the flex, pick up a little bit of nuggets. Jamison Crowder last year, he was huge in PPR, especially in the first half of the season and then a little bit in the second half. But, he catches everything that's thrown at him. You look at that game against Baltimore last year, he was making catches that you didn't think he could make. He has stepped up. He has taken that number one wide receiver role, which, in most teams he wouldn't be the number one wide receiver, but he is the guy for Sam Darnold. He's everything that Robbie Anderson couldn't be for Sam. He can run every single route. He stays quiet. You're not going to hear from Jamison Crowder. He's definitely the perfect person for Sam to have right now. And then lastly, Chris Herndon. He was one of my favorite guys coming out of Miami. He's a big-bodied tight end. Unfortunately, the injury bug has got him the past 2 seasons, and it gave Ryan Griffin, a little bit of wiggle room come into that role last year. Chris Herndon takes the starting job back. I think when all is said and done at the end of the year, he's going to be a top 10 tight end. Sam Darnold loves the guy. He definitely can get into the end zone, and he's going super late in drafts. Jamison Crowder's going late in drafts too. So if you want your last pick in the draft to be Chris Herndon, he most likely will be there. Or you could take him right before your kicker in your defense. So definitely a good stash for Herndon. Great stash for Jamison Crowder. And there's definitely value to be had for Le'Veon Bell with that new offensive line.
This kind of low-key kills me to say. Well, I'll start with something. I 100% agree with Le'Veon Bell having a much better situation this year. The offensive line for the Jets has been a mess for years. It seems like they've been able to rebuild in the right way. And I would give Le'Veon Bell a second shot at love here in my heart to potentially be on my fantasy team. I don't know, though. I got burnt pretty bad last time. But Jamison Crowder is a guy that I agree with. And if you guys have listened to Code Green in the past, and Rich, you'll remember, I've never liked Jamison Crowder. I've thought he was mediocre in Washington. I thought he got overhyped and over-respected for no apparent reason. But last year, he really was huge for Darnold and the New York Jets. And I think that he has become the player that everybody had hyped him up to be at that time. I also think Denzel Mims has some great dynasty value for people. He's a young wide receiver. He has the ability to kind of mature and grow with Sam Darnold. He's a very well-respected draft pick and kid. I think he's somebody to really keep an eye on in New York. And has the ability to learn from Jamison Crowder. These are the only 2 New York Jets, I'd consider. Maybe Le'Veon. Herndon, I think, as your last pick could make some sense, but between suspensions and injuries, I don't know. I think there's some other tight ends that you could take in the last round and get some value from. But, Herndon has had some pretty good games here or there, so not too bad either. Marcus, the New York Jets, is there anyone worth taking to you?
My 2 are 2 of the people that Rich already highlighted. First, I'll go Le'Veon Bell. Similar reasons Rich said. The O-line has been revamped. Should give them better protection. Also, a reason that wasn't mentioned with some of the departures that the Jets lost on offense, there's a lot of targets now that have to be distributed amongst players, and I think Le'Veon gets a good chunk of those targets, especially passing out the backfield. I think he has a way better season this year than he did last year. I think he has a bounce back. He's still 27, 28 years old. He's still young enough to produce, still got some stuff left in the tank. So Le'Veon's my first pick. After that, I'm going to go Jamison Crowder. He's the number one option with the Jets. Sam Darnold seems to trust him. He had the most targets ever in his career last year with 122, I believe, and I think that goes up this year. Le'Veon has to distribute to get the bulk of those targets. Only issue with Jamison is he was a little up and down last year. He has 7 weeks where he scored less than 10 points in fantasy, but I think that diminishes this year because Sam Darnold is healthy. Hopefully he stays healthy the whole season. If he does, Jamison Crowder, I believe, puts up better numbers this year.
Do we think Darnold's going to get get COVID? I mean, he got mono last year. Like, is this?
I think he's immune. He's
Yeah.
immune. He got the mono. The mono is actually the cure. We're gonna find out later. We're gonna have to all just go to random clubs and make out with weird women.
What a concept! We've been social distancing this whole time, and we're gonna find out. Nope, just the opposite. Go make out with a stranger. What a world! What a world we're living in.
That's 2020.
I was about to say it's 2020.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't be. I read a meme earlier today that it'll take me 2 seconds to pull up. But 2020 had so much hype going into it, right? Valentine's Day was on a Friday. February had the extra day. Cinco de Mayo was on Taco Tuesday. 4th of July was on a Saturday. Halloween on a Saturday. Christmas was on a Friday. New Year's begins a 3-day weekend. And all of it's canceled. All this great timing for holidays or whatever, it's canceled. Enjoy.
But football's not.
But football is not, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
For now.
Fingers crossed, knock on wood, whatever you got to do to get the NFL alive and well. So, guys, the last team in the AFC East is the kings of the AFC East, and that is the New England Patriots. But the most different-looking New England Patriots that we've seen in quite a long time, and that's with the new man under center, Super Cam Newton. We discussed this at length, a few weeks ago. But Marcus, we'll kick it off with you because you were not on that show. Who are your players to watch out for on the New England Patriots?
First, we have the new quarterback they acquired, Cam Newton. Hopefully, we see the return of Killer Cam. Cam Newton, what makes him so dangerous is that he can score with his arms and his legs. You know how big he is. I mean, he's gigantic as a quarterback. The Patriots have a really good offensive line. And also, David Andrews comes back this year from missing last season, so he makes the line even better. He got Julian Edelman. He got a healthy Mohamed Sanu. He got Michel, Sony, Michel. He has weapons around him. I believe that he can have a good season because the last time he had an amazing season, he won MVP, and he didn't have any superstar wide receivers across from him. He had Ted Ginn, Dave Funches, and Jericho Cotchery. It was not like he had Randy Moss in his prime or anything like that. And also, he's never missed more than 2 games a season until last year. He was a pretty healthy quarterback until last year came around. So I believe that trend can continue. Out of the first 28 games, I think he only missed 5 games. So hopefully Killer Cam comes back this year for the Patriots. And my second option is Julian Edelman. Julian Edelman going across the middle, he's pretty consistent over the years. Yes, it's not Tom Brady at backfield, but Cam isn't wildly inaccurate. And Julian Edelman has a really good catch rate, it's like 66% or something like that. So Cam can put the ball where it needs to. Julian Edelman run across the middle. Cam got him. I don't see his numbers dropping off too much. I just think they need some chemistry, work it out some timing, and Julian Edelman is going late. So you get him late, I think give you good production for the spot he's being taken in.
Absolutely. I think a lot of the Patriots wide receivers are going to benefit from Cam Newton, and especially I think like big play type of guys who can get down the field are going to benefit from Cam's big arm there. Rich, who are your players to watch out for in New England?
So before we get into that, I think Marcus kind of disrespected my guy Jericho Cotchery in that segment. Jericho Cotchery is one of the most underrated wide receivers of all time. He was the Tyler Lockett of the 2000s, in my opinion.
I'm sorry.
The man tore his groin, and he caught a 3rd and 8 pass to keep the drive alive. I mean, Jericho Cotchery always in our hearts. I'm closer to the guy on my wall. But anyway, I digress. Patriots, of course, have to have 4 players because they're the best in the division. So for me, we're going to start with Cam Newton. Cam Newton is going to be the comeback player of the year. No doubt in my mind. He is in the perfect situation for that. He's going to put up crazy numbers. He's going to put up, numbers close to what he did in the Super Bowl year because he has the greatest coaching staff known to man around him. Julian Edelman is a player that I have on my fantasy team every single year. I could go back 6 straight years. I could see him on every single one of my teams. He is the perfect person to have in your flex. because he puts up numbers like a running back would, a PPR running back, I should say. If you're in a PPR league, he's going to get you the points you need with catches. He can have 0 yards, and you'll still be happy with Julian Edelman in your flex. Sony Michel, he burned me big time last year. He had a really off season, but I think that's just because the team of the Patriots were. Tom Brady had a down year. Everything seemed a little bit off. Obviously they still won the division and went into the playoffs. But Sony Michel with Cam Newton is going to be a beautiful thing. He's just going to get the rock and go. And it's going to be confusing the teams because Cam Newton can take off. They're not going to, load the box against Sony Michel because Cam Newton can do a lot of things, and I think it's going to help Sony Michel to be the standard running back that you want. If you're playing PPR, James White's always the guy. Again, the same with Julian Edelman. If you just have him catching passes and he gets 0 yards, you'll end up being happy with what James White gives you. And I don't think that's going to change at all with Cam Newton. It's going to be fun with Cam Newton. A lot of option plays. So between James White and Julian Edelman, have one starting your flex, have one on the bench, and just keep swapping them in and out based on the matchup. And that's the Patriot way. That's the winning way.
Yeah, I think, I think that the Patriots are just going to be an offensive juggernaut. I think that Josh McDaniels, wait a minute, am I having a brain fart? He's still the offensive coordinator, right?
Yeah. He's going to stay there until Bill retires,
forever.
And then he's going to try to take over.
I was talking, and then I was like, wait, no, he's not the coach of the Colts, is he? But no, he's still in New England. New England or die, basically. Like, he's not going anywhere. But I think this gives him an opportunity to be very creative. And we've seen this ability from him before when he was the head coach in Denver. I won't mention his name because I know it'll tick off Rich. But he had an athletic quarterback, and he made the most of it. And I think Cam Newton having some actual arm talent plus even more athleticism, we're going to see some really good stuff out of him this coming season. So, of course, I have Cam Newton on here. But I also think N'Keal Harry is going to have a really good season. Early round draft pick a few seasons ago. Some big playability, like I mentioned. Guys who are going to be able to get down the field, I think, are going to have a good year. But I will kind of buyer beware with New England pieces, right? Wide receivers, running backs, tight ends, whatever. Because this has always been an offense that likes to spread the wealth. And from a fantasy perspective, it's hard to count on certain Patriots week in and week out because you never really know who's going to get featured. While you can, make some assumptions, Julian Edelman has been pretty consistent every season. You never really quite know who's going to get the rock in New England. So that's my little bit of a buyer beware. But guys, that is the state of the division, the state of the AFC East. If you guys have any thoughts, right, agree, disagree, someone we forgot, go ahead and leave us a voicemail at anchor.fm/daily to dynasty. Link is below down there. It's also in the description of the YouTube player. You can also just drop a comment right in the YouTube player. Let us know if we missed anybody on the state of the AFC East. You can also fire away on Twitter at Daily to Dynasty, at Seagorbs94, at Coda522, and at EMTaylor29. And as I learned this evening, that is because M. Taylor was just taken. What are the odds of that?
It's a popular name, popular handle.
Yeah, I guess so. But guys, that's going to be it for tonight's show. We want to thank all of our partners, including Drew Hall, who I've yet to say verbally on this show, but I put the graphic up every week. But Drew Hall is an incredible NFL photographer and provides us with the photography for the thumbnails that I have a ton of fun making every single week. Last week's was my personal favorite. This week's might even be better. Rich still has to send me the image for the thumbnail.
This week is going to be Marcus. I think that's going to be perfect. That's his debut show. You're going to be with Bill Belichick.
All right, it is official. Marcus, you're going to have to take a selfie and text it to me. I'm very excited. This is going to be a great thumbnail week. We also want to thank our partners over at the Underdog newsletter. If you're a sports fan, odds are you're a fan of Underdog stories. And over at the Underdog newsletter, they sift through hundreds of articles, videos, and podcasts, interviews every single week. And then Tuesday morning, they send out a bite-sized rundown of only the best stories that you can find all in one place. If you want to subscribe to the newsletter, head on over to jokermag.com/newsletter. And of course, you can follow them on Twitter at jokermaghq. All right, guys, we had a real fun show this week. I hope you did too. Again, don't be afraid to either leave us a voicemail, drop a comment in the player below, fire away on Twitter, or if you're more into listening to this thing on the go, it's available via podcast, wherever podcasts are heard. iTunes, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, you name it, it's there. Go ahead and check it out via podcast. Like, subscribe, leave it a 5-star rating. All that fun stuff that helps out a podcast. All right, guys, for Marcus and Rich, I'm Craig, and we'll talk to you guys real soon.